So let's just jump in. You can see some of Ed's fantastic fruit growing here in Juneau. No, not really. Let's go ahead.
This is a dream. This is something I get a chance to pick at, these are mandarin oranges, down in Napa, California, where my son and grandsons live when we're out on our urban foraging mission. However, I have no intention of trying to grow these here. There's a lot of other stuff I can kill with a little more effort.
Righto. Okay, next slide.
You want me to click, or are you clicking?
I'm clicking. Do I
okay.
click? I see how this thing works. Okay, let's just kind of run through what this program is going to do and cover. We're going to look again, like we did in some of our first topics. We'll cover again the site, sun, soil, water table, some basic ideas about soil chemistry, not a deep dive into soil chemistry, what constitutes a good beginning for fruit trees, and then really spend some time with the concept of these organisms that are fungally dependent. Fruit trees are really dependent upon a rich fungal community, and they're very much mutualistic organisms like we all are. And it's great to talk about these things in that context and think about them in that context. And about planning and preparing, and then getting down to some scenarios for planting fruit trees. And there we have it. Okay, I have a confession.
This is Burl. Just briefly, the other pictures I have here are like the Williams Pride apple. That's here at my house in Juneau, and that is a scab-resistant, excellent variety for growing in Southeast Alaska. So and a couple of other pictures to come are in Southeast. We'll mention what they are and where they are and why they're good ones.
Sweet.
But scab resistance is the key.
Scab is a organism. It's a fungal organism that thrives in wet climates and can be a real challenge here in our region. By the way, are these growing in a planter box, or are they naturally?
Nope, these are in the, this was the first apple tree I planted in Juneau. And unfortunately, it's right in front of our house. It has been bear approved and deer approved and porcupine approved in past years, but it has tipped over just on its own. It's popped up. So all of that, it's gone through all the different hazards, I think, pretty much that it could. And it has survived, and it produces fruit in quantity. And unfortunately, it's kind of sinking in soft ground. So when we talk about a little later raised bed plantings and other stuff, I would love to be able to lift this up a foot if possible. But that would take a piece of machinery.
I will be lifting up a tree here this spring. Okay, this is my confessional slide, really for me, and I want to first think about something: the solar cycle of our planet. And early April is roughly equivalent to mid-September. So in early April, you can look at where the sun is landing on the property that you think you might like to bless with an orchard, and ask yourself, is this a good place to do this? Then the second point is that these trees really, there may be varieties that do well in the wetness. For example, the Oregon crabapple, that's the native crabapple rootstock, is fairly tolerant of wet conditions. But generally speaking, there's a lot to be said about avoiding planting in water. And I will confess to have killed at least 6 apple trees, and learned sort of in the school of hard knocks that planting in wet areas is a problem and not something you want to do. So we have a real challenging situation in terms of soil here. In places and other places, there's great soil, but considering your soil type and adapting, and that water table business is very important as well. So there's a great example of water table. Somebody dug a hole, and this is a photograph I stole off the internet. dug a hole and you just see what happens. You know, does it fill up with water? And if it does get a little water in the bottom, does it drain? And there we are. I'm talking again about the my own failings that happened in the earlier 2000s. These mycorrhizal organisms that live in and in association with fruit tree roots can't thrive where the soil is soaked for a long time.
If I may, on this one too,
Jump in.
If folks are trying to decide where to put their trees, you know, dig holes here and there around their yard, hopefully in the sunny location. And even if water doesn't come up into the hole from underground, dig that same hole 6 inches or a foot, ideally maybe a foot deep, and pour a bucket of water in there to see how fast it disappears. How fast does it soak into the ground? So, I mean, it should disappear in an hour or two at most, you know, which would indicate the comparison of Mother Nature dumping a lot of rain on the soil, which happens around here often, as we've seen recently. And if that soil doesn't drain well enough, then that means, yeah, raise it up or mix in a lot of gravel or put in drain pipes or some other solution.
Yeah. So that's a percolation test in a nutshell. That's what he just described. He digs a hole and takes a bucket of water and throws it in there and sees what happens. Does it percolate out and drain away, which is something you want to see for a soil that you're going to plant a fruit tree in. We'll talk a little bit about soil chemistry, and it just so happens that if you're in the Chilkat Valley and you're serious about starting a fenced orchard, we can contact me and we can help you talk about it, look at it, and potentially help you interpret a soil test or two if you're serious. And I don't mean that if you're going to plant one tree in your yard, you can just go buy your own soil test for about $20 in postage. And then you'll get this very confusing piece of paper back, and you'll have to make sense out of it, which is a great way to learn something. And I think of this as being something to consider, though, because when you think about the hope and the dreams and the sweat and the years that are involved here, I mean, how many times do you want to start over? If you're like me, you probably don't want to start over again with this. I'm starting over this spring with, after 3 years or so of study and thinking about fruit trees and reading everything I could get my hands on. And so it's a good idea to understand your soil. That's enough said about that. Ed, anything to suggest about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was looking at your soil test particularly and seeing you're on the bottom end of the organic matter preferred. Mm-hmm. I'm on, with my soil test here, if I dug one in my native so-called soil, it'd probably be more like 50% organic because it's muskeg. Mm-hmm. So we've added a lot of sand and other stuff and drainage, dug ditches and put in pipes here and there for drainage. pH is pretty close. Your nutrient levels look pretty good generally. So upping the pH here.
This is the Henderson farm. This is the lower. Okay. This is the bottom of the Henderson farm. Here is what this is. And it also, Darren was pointing out to me that this phosphorus number is remarkably high. So anyway, the soil test is a useful thing, and it really kind of kicks your butt and makes you learn something, which is a good thing. Let's see some soil ideals and chem speak. I won't dwell long on this, but pH ends up being a pretty important piece of this. The pH range of 6.3 to 6.7, and these are. I'm kind of an acolyte of a guy by the name of Michael Phillips, who is an author of a number of books about fruit trees, and I'm basing my statements on Michael's stuff. Michael will be presenting in March, in early March, providing a workshop on the 5 tenets of the holistic orchard. The relationship between these positively charged elements, calcium, magnesium, and potassium, end up being fairly significant in the way that soil behaves and is related to pH, because pH is about free radicals, one form or another, either negatively charged or positively charged. So they interact with these things like calcium, magnesium, potassium, phosphorus as well. One of the interesting things I've read recently that actually affects the ability of scab to thrive has to do with the calcium and potassium ratio. That's interesting there. That's sort of an optimal level shown. And then the organic material, a bare minimum of 3%, probably more like 5% would be better. Ed, anything you want to say? Jump in.
Carry on.
Okay.
Other than, adding organic matter. Yep.
Adding organic matter. Okay. Let's see. This was, I really love this quote, Charles Walters of Acres, Alaska. Plants in touch with balanced exchangeable nutrients provide their own protection against bacterial, fungal, and insect attack. And so the upshot there is thinking of balanced orchard nutrition as a long-range goal. It's not something you're going to get when you start planting a tree. It takes a while, and it's really interactive with this mycorrhizal community. That's sort of our next topic. And it protects, it produces, and it protects the balance. Okay, so talk about that beautiful picture there, Ed.
So this is in Haines. Well, this is way out the road, actually. This is at George and Lynn Campbell's place, Mount Royal Plum, which is really a good one and does ripen here in Juneau also. This one is also bear approved in both locations. And again, out there at 24 Mile out above the new bridge, the Klahini Bridge is where this one is growing. So, and bears did visit it this summer, unfortunately. But anyway, a good variety, and this is the only one she has. So this is actually a relatively self-pollinating variety. Okay.
So what constitutes a good start? And so we're going to talk about a proper planning and few different strategies. Whether, we're talking in one instance, we're talking about radical amendment, where we're actually going to bring in soil, and then talking about more of a standard approach, which is very judicious and very low on the amendment scale. Protection from wildlife and snow. Today I looked at a tree that I planted last spring, along with 3 little bench grafted cultivars of the Charles Anway crabapple, and they're under a little pyramid of cheap wood and crappy roofing that's protecting them. But there was some effort that went in there, although hardly a penny spent. The focus on a good start is really about growing wood. You're not growing fruit. You're making a tree thrive, and in the years prior to its producing fruit. And then there's the actual shape of the tree. So training branches or pruning ends up being initially important. And then this business about these fungi that end up being so important in the lives of these critters.
I'll throw a couple comments here. So you mentioned, radical soil amendment, which might include bringing in a dump truck load of soil, maybe, if you're so lucky as to be able to back a dump truck in near where you are, or have some hardy helpers to move it. It might be worth, if you're thinking about doing that, have a soil test done on that pile of soil before it shows up in your yard, to see what it has. And then, and when you're moving all that soil, that's the ideal time to be adding amendments to it: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, pH changes, and that sort of thing. So
Cool.
that you can do that when you're moving that soil, or when some young people are moving that soil.
Your high school class.
Whoever you can recruit or pay to do that. Yeah, protection from the wildlife and snow is important. Snow's coming down out here. I'm going to be watching because it's kind of heavy, sticky snow. If it piles up too much, I may have to knock some snow off my trees so they don't break off, and look at those low branches to see if they're down. If you have low branches in the snow, they need to be pruned when you can get back to them.
Because they will certainly be pruned later on by the natural settling of the snow.
Unfortunately, leaving larger wounds than we might doing it with sharp tools. The growing wood, not fruit, is really important. You know, I try to tell people, it's fine to let them flower for the first 2 years. That's nice to see. But pinch off the young fruits those first 2 years at least, maybe another, so that the trees get a chance to grow a good structure to support a larger fruit load. Because if they have too much fruit too early, it uses lots and lots of energy and can artificially dwarf the tree or even kill the tree. You know, and some of these trees that come in from down south, stuff that I bring in, you know, a lot of them will bloom the first year that I have them here. And so I don't want to let them have fruit, even though I know folks want to taste those. And doing the branch shaping and stuff, you'll see that in a little bit, those trees which are first planted this year. That's all.
Something to think about the growing wood issue too. If you're putting a standard rootstock tree in the ground, which is a tree that will grow to the standard size of a large apple tree. I went to college in Corvallis, Oregon, and there was a 30-foot tall apple tree in my yard. And of course, you couldn't pick the fruit. Then that tree here, if we plant that tree, it will take a much longer to bear fruit. So there's going to be a lot of years of woody growth where it's just simply not going to bear fruit. Whereas if you plant dwarf stock fruit trees in a good site, you know, with good support, you'll get fruit in a shorter amount of time, in a shorter duration of waiting.
Along with that can also be, you can get more trees in a smaller space, unless, of course, you are going to graft 27 different varieties on that one Antonovka rootstock tree that becomes 30 feet tall and wide or whatever. I mean, I grew up certainly going over to my neighbor's house, and there'd be 3 or 4 of us kids up in one tree eating apples. Hopefully, if our mothers would give us a salt shaker or a cinnamon and sugar shaker, even more rarely. But you get a crowd up in one of those trees. Most of us don't have room for that.
Okay, this is where my fungal digression begins. And the fungal friendlies, there's some really nasty fungal things, for example, scab, but the fungal friendlies are really critical to the growth and thriving of these trees. Arbuscular mycorrhiza, the arbuscule is a little gallery that's inside of a tree root. So this whole group of different species of fungi, there's over 300 different species of arbuscular mycorrhiza. And they inhabit the roots of some 250,000 different species of plant, including fruit and nut trees. And their business is to import nutrients into the tree's roots, and in exchange, they get the sugars that the tree produces, and then they're able to convert and store them as fatty acids inside the tree's roots. And it turns out that this is a group of fungi that have a tremendous impact on the soil's ability to sequester carbon, which is a big deal. It's a big deal, sequestration of carbon. And I won't, maybe even a third of the soil's ability worldwide might be related to the activity of fungi or maybe something in that order. It's quite remarkable. But these are critters that have evolved to interdepend on fungi, and not just arbuscular mycorrhiza, but also other kinds. And we need to feed them. We need to feed that fungi. If you feed the fungi, you're feeding the tree. And this is an example of the little gallery that's inside of a tree's roots, where the fungi sets up its little thing. It reminds me of a mammalian lung, really, and in some ways the actual function is similar.
Well, lungs, or even a circulatory system, the blood, right, the veins and the arteries and the capillaries and all. So yep, doing the same thing, getting nutrients, through the body.
So what we can do, it turns out that these trees feed at the surface. About 90% maybe of the nutrient that fruit trees take in comes from the top 6 inches of the soil. And the good thing is that you can amend that. It's easy. You're not digging up, or it's like a gardener, right? A gardener is turning the soil every year. My wife is turning the soil of the garden and adding compost and changing things up. This is a tree that's continuously and well and firmly rooted, we hope. And if it's not, we're going to stake it up so that it stays upright. But we top dress with mulch to feed this community that it requires. And some of the things that we can use are woody orchard compost, spoiled hay, fall leaves, and this small stem deciduous chipped wood, which I'm going to do another digression on. You can see that the orchard compost has a little higher carbon ratio. And this is what supports the soil life that the trees require. Okay, here's an example. I wish that was me. And are those fairly young trees? As in, no, they're probably not. They're spaced fairly close, so they might be semi-dwarf trees or maybe dwarf trees, depending on the climate and environment. But you can see that person is mulching. You can also see that the perimeter of the tree is protected with looks like some hardware cloth, so that the voles or whatever they've got there aren't going to strip around the tree. Probably there is no mulch inside of that little tree ring inside the cage. We don't want any mulch or organics up against the trunk of the tree. And
I would guess those are probably, that the tree that's closest to us looks like at most 3 or 4 years old. The next one down might be a few more years old, just based on the larger diameter. But still a young orchard that could well be, at least some of those trees should be producing fruit, being allowed to produce fruit where they are. And it looks like you got a couple different kinds of mulch there nearer to us versus farther away.
There's a good photo, and these I just copied off the internet. Fungally dominant woody compost, as opposed to the garden variety compost. Garden compost is more bacterially dominant. You read about, and you'll find it online, this word Ramial, and it's a French word. There was a Quebec and French experimentation about this some years ago, apparently. And Ramial chipped wood is simply a reference to the small stemmed wood. Coarse chipped material. We're not talking about sawdust straight from Chad's mill or Buster's mill. That would not be the same thing, because that's extremely high. The sawdust from a lumber mill, for example, here in Southeast Alaska, is conifers, not deciduous trees, and would be 400 to 1 if you took its temperature in terms of carbon nitrogen ratio. The chipped deciduous stems are under about 2.5 inches, and up to 20% can be coniferous. And this is sort of a recipe that comes from Michael Phillips. So the brilliant thing I want to emphasize here about this source of compost for orchards is that we have a lot of it here. Sitka, alder, cottonwood, willow are wonderful for this kind of thing. And so I'm looking at a quote directly from Michael Phillips. The small new tree growth has a lot of soluble lignin that's not really wood yet. It's in the cambium layer, and thus, as the twig diameter goes down, the amount of nutrient goes up. And so those nutrients are available. That bud tissue that will build ideal soil is available in these chipped small stem deciduous plants.
I'd like to throw in a caution here on here we're going to talk about, well, yeah, and your next slide is fine too, that using chips, and very often for me, certainly for us in Juneau, maybe also in Ames, the power company hires several different companies to chip or to cut trees and brush underneath power lines, and then homeowners hire a couple of tree removal services, some of which do chip the wood, and they're usually happy to give those wood chips away. And I am happy to take them. And they'll deliver and give them maybe some of their favorite adult beverage or otherwise, or some cash for a dump truck load. And it's great stuff. It really breaks down quickly very often, especially if it's in the truck overnight. When they dump it out into my yard, it is cooking already, because usually it's green stuff. And whether that be green spruce and hemlocks, cottonwoods, willows, alders, all of that stuff, it starts to break down very fast. And I mean, it's hot. You can be within a few feet of it and feel the heat. You can see the steam rising if it's a cooler day. And I just let the stuff break down. The fresh stuff I might use for paths in between my garden boxes and all that. But we need to be careful as far as timing for use. And I learned this one the hard way, digging into these piles of wood chips. You can move them right in the first week or two after you get them. But then you want to stay away from them for a couple of months, if possible, or wear a really good dust mask or more, because there is so much fungal activity in them, and lots of spores are being generated, which you do not want to breathe. And my wife and I both reacted after moving some of this material. We dug into it, and you see the clouds of powdery puffs of spores coming up out of them. And we had difficulty breathing for the next couple of days. So caution, warning, be careful with this stuff. It does break down. It's great material to use, eventually on the surface. And that's the other thing too is, and you keep mentioning it, Burl, too, as you should, is this is not meant to be mixed into the soil. This should be on the surface as mulch, the bottom layer of that, and it can be mixed with, as you mentioned here too, a little later, I think, mixing it with some compost, some forest soil, and that sort of thing. And it will break down, the bottom layer of that will break down, and it becomes soil. And you can see the roots, the tree roots, and roots of shrubs and other stuff will move into that mostly broken down material in just a year or 2 or 3. So just caution on how you use it. Put it on the surface of the soil. That's the important thing. And, if you can age it, I think your next slide maybe talks about the aging process for this, and, getting it started composting.
All right. So here we go. This is my fungal digression number 3, sort of making a preparation that you're gonna you're going to leave and let stand. And this is kind of an ideal setup here, you know. So you go to your buddy with a chipper. I'm on the phone. I've found my chipper guy, and he's up the highway. I'm going to borrow that thing, and I got a bunch of great cottonwood I'm going to chip up. Mix in a little garden compost. Just so happens that I have a wonderful composting outhouse that generates some humanure, and could also add in native soil. Native forest soil under a deciduous forest canopy would be a great place to get that fungal inoculant, or you could buy it. You can buy fungal inoculant, and to fire it up, maybe a little seaweed and animal manure. Well, humanure is a great example, except humanure is heavily composted. It's at the end of its composting cycle, not the way, say, chicken manure would be. And then you're going to cover it after mixing and just leave it. Ed, any thoughts on that?
You covered it.
Okay. And of course, by the way, this is a recorded program, so you can come back and look at this and at your leisure to a point. I'm not quite sure how long it all lives on the website. I gotta probably get a copy of it too. Okay, Ramial chipped wood, RCW straight no chaser. And so this was just like a mind-blowing idea. I thought, I was sure that we had to always approach this as a composting project. You have to chip this stuff up. But when I realized what I was reading, that the carbon nitrogen ratio in these Ramial diameter stems is 30-1, going no, you know, at the large end, these ratios rise dramatically, of course, and noting 400-1 would be lumberyard type of carbon nitrogen ratios. So if you're trying to put 40-1 on your orchard, you put 25-1 on your garden compost. Careful preparation of small stem deciduous chipped wood is suitable to apply as an orchard top dressing without lengthy composting. And that's a pretty cool thing, because it's such a readily available material. It's growing in the right of way along the byways and highways, as long as we're not spraying toxins on them. It's in the wood lots where there's any kind of succession here in Southeast Alaska. It's going to be cottonwood and Sitka alder. Hey, all right. Could you tell us about this? Could you tell us a little segue,
Sure.
away from all that that print and black and white space, Ed, please?
So Joe Orsi and I, back in the 90s, we got a little carried away with it, as you might see. Grafting, buying cyanwood from a variety of nurseries, several which are no longer in business. Bear Creek Nursery was one, used to have about, usually a couple hundred varieties of cyanwood. And so we tried to find the early varieties. We had small trees, but we were doing multiple varieties on individual trees. And between our two orchards, we're about three miles apart between the ferry terminal and T Harbor. We got to one after a few years of growing, and look at all these apples. Well, we got to taste them and try to determine which are the best. So we coerced our families into helping with the apple tasting in I think it was late September. This table had, this was only about half the table of apples. And I think we had close to 70 varieties. Our kids, our youngest, my daughter and Joe's 3 kids here, I think the youngest are 10 now, and they're all in their 30s and have families of their own. And we put together a little rating system, sweet, tart, mealy, crisp, soft, mealy, what other assorted criteria. And kind of went around the room. Everybody gets to, have their opinion, and had different preferences. And pretty soon it got to the point where the kids would say, Dad, enough already. I mean, we can't taste, they all taste the same. After you taste, it isn't quite as bad as wine tasting. We're about 4 wine tastings and you got to quit. Well, yeah, as long as you're not driving, you're okay. You need a designated driver. But still, it was pretty impressive that we could grow all these varieties. I mean, they grew, and we had some really nice sunny summers. And our scab weren't too scabby, at least, from a little distance, they don't look too scabby. But we have certainly reduced the numbers of trees that we are growing, or we clipped off the varieties of some of these that we didn't like the taste of. Some of them, and all the leftovers, all the bits and pieces got thrown into a big pot, made the best applesauce ever. So, and the other thing, I guess, I'd probably say about this, we talked about and got, although we didn't really use much, of a cider press. So to press apples, some of our surplus apples, to make apple juice, and then potentially ferment it a bit to make it even better. So it was a great time, and I highly recommend it. Certainly having multiple varieties is important in home orchards or in a neighborhood. Again, good for pollination. Get various different varieties. There's some great ones out there, and some of them may only be suitable for making cider or something because they taste unpleasant. Let's put it that way.
Okay, here we go, which is the part about planting fruit trees here and actually getting something in the ground. Let's imagine a situation where we have a native soil. You're going to put this native soil, you're going to plant a tree. And not much is going in that hole besides the native soil. And this is an example kind of through my eyes, Ed's eyes, and Michael Phillips' eyes of what might be a basic amendment. Rock phosphate is a natural rock that's ground, phosphate rock, about a coffee can of that. One approach to mycorrhizal inoculation, which is Mardell Gunn's suggestion, was, hey, just get a bucket of deciduous forest soil and throw it in there with it. Great. You can also purchase mycorrhizal inoculant. Some low key nitrogen would be okay, and not real high soluble NPK fertilizer. That would not be a good idea. But seaweed really kind of covers those bases too. And you could throw some compost in, you could throw none in, or you could throw a few gallons of compost in. That'd be okay.
I'll throw a couple more in here and answer a question I just saw from Scott Hansen, who's asking about calcium. And we'll throw all we're going to lump them all together really, because we didn't really talk about modifying pH either. So, and one of the things you and I talked about, Burl, was soil testing. And I was saying, well, I'm not adding lime to my soil normally, even though I know it starts out acidic. But what I'm using, so I am using rock phosphate, which is calcium phosphate. And I'm using wood ashes. So that is, it's high in calcium, high in potassium, and both of which bone meal is calcium and phosphorus. So all of those three, and if you can get green sand, tends to be very high. I think it's 30% calcium, and it's high in potassium. So all of those act as essentially calcium sources / lime sources / pH raising amendments. And if folks are bringing in a lot of seaweed, which very often has a lot of crushed shell, or even if they go to some beaches, I've certainly, you go by them in your boat and you can see the white patches. They're finely crushed shells, which again is calcium with a little bit of phosphorus. And I'll even throw bones and shells into my wood stove, which when you heat them, and then they crumble more easily, releasing their calcium and phosphorus. So all of those help to modify the pH. That the crushed shells are kind of 10,000 year, the ultimate in slow release calcium. So that's one of the ways we bring that material in. If you folks might be using fish bone meal also, which is higher in nitrogen, but again, you're getting, the bones are calcium and phosphorus. So that's, you know, some of the materials we either have locally or can bring in as an amendments.
So you get bare rooted trees in the mail. We're going to take a look at a bare rooted tree in just a minute. You don't want those bare roots to dry out for any reason. And if you're going to unpack that bare rooted bundle, it's wet inside. You are pretty much guaranteed that those roots are not going to be dry when you unpack them. So there's a good argument for just keeping it in a dark place and enclosed in its wrapper, or you could heel them into the ground out of the sun, but don't let them dry out. And you're creating a hole that is well fluffed, in my view. In the case of Ed's going to show a planting in a raised bed it's quite excellent soil, and he doesn't really do much fluffing, as you'll see, but that's a pretty great soil matrix that he's putting it into. The edges of the hole are kind of broken and chopped, and then soak the tree in a seaweed tea solution for a while before you put them in the ground. This is one I stole from Rob Bishop. Thank you, Rob. And shows the pieces and parts that that Ed will be showing you in just a moment. That graft union is where some people obviously are new, were in our last workshop. That graft union is the joint between the rootstock and the cultivar or variety, right? These fruit trees, generally speaking, are two different trees that have been grafted together. The top is a clone and the bottom is a clone, and they come together at the graft.
Occasionally, however, Burl, the rootstock might be a seedling rootstock.
Okay.
So that is common, but with most seedling rootstocks, those are likely to be full-size, standard-size trees. If you go back to good old Johnny Appleseed and all the rest of that, well, he just planted the seeds from cider mills that he got and threw the seeds out, some of them which resulted in good trees, some not good trees, but they were apples, and they could be made, again, just like I mentioned, you could turn them into cider, and that was something that could be preserved and made great trading stock too in the good old days.
Right on. So yeah, so John Chapman was into making cider trees happen. Okay, you've dug your hole, you've kept it moist. That graft swell is going to end up about 3 or 4 feet above the soil line.
Inches.
And go ahead.
Inches.
I'm sorry. Yeah. You're placing that tree in a way that you've got that big hole, and now you've backfilled dirt. You've backfilled dirt so that the roots are set on top of something, the soil, a hump of soil. And then you're going to spread those roots. If you just take that rootstock and hang it down and bury it, you're making a mistake, because those roots will be pointed downward, and you want those roots to be pointed out laterally. So they need to be supported by a little bit of dirt. And in the end, you've got that graft swell about 3 to 4 inches above the soil line. With that stem nice and vertical, you're backfilling and then pouring water in, and Ed's going to show you how to. You're going to be putting about 5 gallons of water a week. Of course, that depends on the heat in the sun. Also, you're blocking out the weed competitors. You know, if you have heavy sod where you're planting, and the weeds, of course, are consuming nutrients, So you can use a layer of cardboard around that planting area, that planting hole. You can also cover that with mulch. And then ultimately you're keeping that ring around the tree, roughly a foot in diameter would be a real ideal. I don't see much of that around here. You're keeping that free of organics, and later on might add in some fine gravel to keep that free of organics and keep the weeds in check around the very base of the tree.
I'll make one mention here of, you mentioned sod. So sod can be used in a couple of different ways if you're planting into a lawn or something like that. I mean, lawn is a 4-letter word in my book, but still I tend to remove it or get rid of it. And one way to get rid of it is actually to bury the sod as fertilizer. And when you bury sod, turn it upside down too. So if you're taking the top layer, say you're going to dig a hole 3 feet across for your planting hole, then lift up that sod, that top, say 4 inches, with most of the grass and weed roots. That stuff can be used, like I said, that's where most of the nutrients, at least held by the grass and roots and weeds, are. So that can be used as fertilizer, can be buried in the hole selectively, or even put on the surface afterwards, but again, upside down. So that, and then on top of that, you put your mulch, cardboard, and other stuff.
Okay.
So
Well,
here,
okay, go for it.
This was a tree recently. I think it was a little farther. I think the next one down, maybe January 6th, an auspicious day, I think it was, for this tree at least. And we're not going to get into politics here. So this was a tree that was in the ground. These were trees I got last April, and they were bare root. Then I put them into some pots. These are a few that I had that didn't sell this past summer. So they're in the pots in pretty well drained soil. Hopefully, maybe Rob next time will talk about planting trees in pots for like in their greenhouses and stuff. But here again, there's a close-up picture of the graft union where the rootstock, where you can actually see where they cut off the top of the rootstock after the new scion wood started to grow, so that the old rootstock wouldn't compete. So all the nutrients from the rootstock are now going up into the new tree. And we will keep showing you and mentioning it. Here's some of the roots again. These are roots. So there were more roots going out wide where these trees came up from the Skagit Valley. They had quite a wide root system that had been cut off when the trees were lifted. So these are some new roots. They're easy. The nice thing about bare root trees are easy to handle. And I don't know if we may not talk about balled and burlap trees, which come with a clay root ball, are difficult to handle. And I'm just going to leave it at that. And that.
So did you thin those roots after you took them out of the pot?
I did not. Nope. I pretty much lifted them out of the pot, trimmed off anything that looked dead. If there's some dead roots, although those side roots might well serve as a little extra support, but we would rather have clean, new roots without any. We don't want to be burying dead wood in the soil. So that's the challenge, is putting them into a pot where finding sometimes you need a really big pot because they've got a really great root system. Some trees do, and some I've gotten don't have nearly enough. So you have to be careful with them. We get the tag. Hopefully we get a tag with your trees, so it's not a mystery what kind of a tree it is. And it has some basic information. It tells you the variety, of course. It may tell you how big the tree is going to get. Some really basic stuff on planting. That isn't enough information.
Yeah, if you get a tree from a quality nursery, they'll tell you the rootstock, but you've ordered the rootstock and the cultivar in hopefully together.
Yes,
so you know
and-
what you're getting.
Right. I've chosen what I want based on what their catalog has, and my experience, and will tell folks, well, okay, I expect this tree, if it's a semi-dwarf tree, to get to be 10 to 15 feet in 10 to 15 years. So you should plant it 10 to 15 feet apart. So, and go from there. And then the tools, of course, an assortment, got to have tools. And we've got the digger, scratcher, shovel, some stakes, some compost, some seaweed, and miscellaneous other protective gear that we're going to see here shortly. So for this example, now there was still some snow in the background on January 8th it was, okay. But the soil anyway there's no frost in the ground. This bed was a garlic bed harvested at the beginning of August in 2020. And I grow garlic in very rich soil. Then we did plant some cover crop on it. You see a little bit of the green stuff left on there. So this is good, really good, well-drained soil, very sunny location. And these are 2x12, so it's a foot deep soil on top of some poorer soil underneath, but very well drained. So that's, trying to give it the best opportunity. Where I dug the hole, it's nice loose material. Again, we're digging the hole to accommodate that so that the graft union can remain above the soil surface. And you can see where the roots are kind of spread out in there. Next.
Too, keep in mind, this is great soil in a raised bed box. It's not like he's busting native soil. So he doesn't have a big project of digging and fluffing soil, etc.
Right. So, and I think I sent to you, I'm not sure if you got a chance to put it in here or we'll have it later, my raised box recipe for soil, which is primarily for growing vegetables. However, this is something too, if you're not ready, you could make this soil and grow vegetables in it for a year or two and then plant a fruit tree or two. And again, in a 4-foot wide box, it's a foot deep, and whatever length you want, you could get, if you had a 16-foot long box, you could have 2 fruit trees in there. Not to mention growing vegetables and flowers and other stuff for 3 or 4 or 5 years as these fruit trees grow soil to take over the box.
Well, I tell you what, I'll put that on the website as a resource.
Sure.
It'll be there with the recorded program. Okay.
Get a couple of stakes, and this is, got to have stakes in there. This tree, maybe a tree that had more roots, you could think, oh, I'm going to leave it alone. I don't have to stake it. But the problem is, a little bit of wind. The soil is nice and loose, even though I'll be watering it in and all that sort of thing. Having a couple of stakes, at least one stake, 2 to 3 is good, loosely tied to the tree. So the tree can move back and forth a bit in the breeze. That actually helps stimulate better rooting for stability. And again, don't tie it tight with some steel wire or other stuff. Actually tie it loose. And you might have some padding. Most of the time I've got some 1/2 inch wide nylon strapping. It's fairly soft. Usually I'll have a loop that's 2 or 3 inches larger in diameter than the diameter of the trunk. So the tree can move when I have it supported in there. And those, again, depending on the type of tree you're planting, if it's for a dwarf apple tree, basically will be staked. There you'd want to actually have a permanent 1 or 2 steel stakes for forever, because they don't have that big a root system for support. Where with a semi-dwarf tree, 2 or 3 years maximum. And normally I'll remove the stakes. And likewise for a full-size tree on Antonovka or otherwise. I do use these slow release fertilizer pellets are not an organic source in particular. But they are a slow release. Again, how many to use depends on the size of the tree. So you read the directions. You might also, I'm sure a lot of folks have heard about tree spikes, which again are usually slow release fertilizer that you literally can pound in. And these want to be out near the tip of the roots, not right up against the trunk. So on the outer edges of the holes, in this case, the tree spikes, or even you can continue to use these fertilizer pellets in later years by poking holes with a crowbar or a piece of rebar or something like that, again, out near the drip line. And again, depending on the diameter of the tree, as it gets bigger, you use more and more fertilizer or compost or seaweed or all the other good stuff. And then planting depth, again, you can see where that graft union is in relation to the soil level.
Okay.
Water in the soil as we go to gently do this. Even though they talk about very often in directions for planting a tree, they'll say tamp down the soil. I'm not sure exactly what tamping down means. If that means do the jig on top of your soil, your roots, I don't recommend that. The watering will settle the soil quite nicely. After I do that, then I'll add 1 or 2 inches of compost around the tree away from the trunk. And then I'll add a couple inches of seaweed, again, away from the trunk. And you can still see that the planting depth, that graft union is above all of that. And I'm keeping the compost and the seaweed, like you say, 6 inches away from the trunk. You don't want to pile it up against there. Again, you can have the wrong kind of fungi growing and can potentially attack the bark of the trunk, and it can go downhill from there.
Yes, indeed.
One challenge too, again, depending on what your soil is like, is if you've got nice loose organic soil, the organic materials are used up, disappear, literally almost evaporate, turn into carbon dioxide and go off into the air. And so that means you have to keep adding some of that to there as that material disappears. So, and you may well want to add a little topsoil, a little bit of sand mixed with that compost to maintain the level and to maintain the drainage for the tree. A lot of times I will prune, if I'm selling bare root trees to people, I will prune the tree. I'll pull the tree out of the pot, put it in a bag for them, in a garbage bag, so they can take it home. And before they get out of my yard, I'll usually prune it first to show them how it should be pruned. Or if maybe they're getting a bunch of trees, I'll prune one at least. So I'll do that pruning immediately because, again, when those trees were gently dug or not so gently dug from the nursery, they lost roots, but most of them were not pruned. So with less roots, the tree cannot support as much branching. So we need to balance the top growth to the bottom growth. Or again, you may have too much top growth or attempted top growth, too many buds, which the roots cannot support. It cannot supply water and nutrients to the tree to grow. So if we have fewer buds on the tree, then the nutrients go into those fewer but stronger buds. We're going to prune to outward facing buds or branches. And here on the left photo, you can see there's basically 2 main leaders. So I'm pruning out the center leader, and then the other one will get pruned back even more. So I have one main leader that's the tallest one, and then the others are branching off to the sides. And yeah, eyes open. I mean, one of the other pictures that I had, my wife took me one picture with my eyes open and one closed. Eyes open is better. remove, again, we talk about snow, potentially snow, deep snow settling and ripping off lower branches. And again, you're going to look at, you're going to start with the training of the tree right from the beginning. So some of those branches are growing in the wrong direction. You can see one branch on the left photo, the branch is going down at quite a steep angle. That one needs to be removed. And then I'm pruning out more of the other spurs that are coming off the side. So again, there's fewer buds to have the roots feed, basically. Protective, protection. Stovepipe is a great one to use for porcupines. Unfortunately, sometimes one length of stovepipe isn't hardly enough. So we've got some trees that, some bigger trees in some other location where we've actually taken pieces of stovepipe, 2 lengths of it, or even actually take a piece of stovepipe and where the first branches come off 3, 4, 5 feet off the ground, we will drill holes in the top of the stovepipe and hang the stovepipe from the branches. So otherwise a porcupine, some of the big ones we have around here, trophy size, can stand on their hind legs up 3 feet tall, reach up with their claws and get on top of that stovepipe and do chin-ups to get themselves up into the trees. So it's an ongoing battle. And of course you have to take note, watch the trees as they grow, that you got to remove this stuff so that doesn't girdle the tree. This flexible drain pipe is great material. You know, I scavenge this from construction sites and give it to people with their trees when I sell them some. You take a piece of that. This is 4-inch drain pipe, but it also comes in 6-inch diameter. Take a corrugated knife, a bread knife, to cut it down one side, and then expand it and put it around the base of the tree to prevent weed whacker disease. And it also helps protect against voles to keep the critters out away from that too. So again, protection is essential. Next slide, Burl. So more protection here. I've got some lightweight mesh, both for deer and porcupine protection. And that really helps a lot. For bears and moose, you need to do a lot more. I mean, there you need, along the perimeter of your orchard, you're going to need some serious fencing, electrical fencing, tall fencing for deterrence. And go back to Burl 1. On the right side, you can also see this is 1/4-inch hardware cloth to keep the voles away from the bark. The voles and the mice, particularly underneath deep snow, go right along the soil surface. And you may, when the snow melts off in the spring, sometimes you'll see they have been girdled by those little critters, and that's pretty deadly for the tree. So I want to keep them away. And just in the last couple of days, I had some apple tree prunings I had thrown over a bank. And when the snow melted away, I saw those apple tree prunings had been completely chewed of all their bark. So you got to keep the voles. I know in Haines, you've got a few rabbits, although maybe not too many, but in other places that can be a problem. And rabbits can be right on, go on the surface of the snowshoe hares, and chew much higher up in the tree.
The Haines Pies cherry.
And I took a picture of these some years back. I believe it's next to on the property line above the Haines Senior Center. Oh, and they're nice cherries. You can grow much nicer cherries there than we can here in Juneau. Again, a big part of it is because of more heat, more sun, drier conditions. Ours will tend to have little brown patches on them, but they still make a good pie.
So I'm going to talk about a mounding scenario, and this is sort of in the category of the learning curve. Having killed a few apple trees and still wanting to plant them again in the same spot, I realized that water table and that clay layer, which kind of work hand in glove to create a problem for fruit trees that has not stopped our sweet cherries from making food and growing vigorously, but has not worked for apples. So got some bad clay, got a water table issue. I'm going to be moving some dirt this spring, and let's take a look at it. So for me, I'm interested in kind of creating a modest base layer of a decomposing material that is kind of a long-term bank for some mycorrhizal fungi. Not a lot, but some, maybe 25% or so cover. Then I'm going to pile on imported soil about 1.5 feet deep, and I'll put a few gallons of compost per hole, a little bit of rock phosphate, some seaweed, and a few buckets of that deciduous forest soil in there. And this is a picture of what that might look like. This is the Burl Sheldon graphic here. You've got the imported soil. You can see down on the bottom, you can see the clay layer and the seasonal water table. That's such a problem. There is some soil there, and of course, with that clay comes a lot of nutrients as well. And Nancy's always pointing out to me that there's a lot of earthworms in that clay soil too. So it's not all bad. You can see there, I've used some cardboard to block out the weed competitors. I've got some orchard compost that I'm going to top dress it with. We've got a staked tree, and you can kind of see my graphic showing some decomposing material down there that I'm going to lay down prior to the planting. I'm not putting so much decomposing material in the planting as to make the tree root situation destabilized. The trees need to establish themselves and not be destabilized by hugel culture. There's a topic there that we touch on in the last slide. Hugel culture is a decomposing woody pile that you can grow things on. I think it kind of is problematic where tree roots are concerned in terms of stability. Anything to throw in there, Ed?
Sure. You mentioned, and we've kind of joked about basically building a raft on top of wet soil to float your tree. So, but again, and folks in Skagway use it a lot, even more so where they're drier. And part of their reasoning is not they want the organic matter, and eventually as the large woody debris, it's definitely that. Even to cottonwood logs, which can be buried. The problem is they've got to make sure they've been cut for a year or two. Otherwise, the cottonwood logs, if you bury them, they will sprout. It'll happen in Haines too. So you want to be careful of that. But again, laying down that large woody debris first, throwing some soil, some compost and other stuff on top of that, and or branches and brush and stuff too. All of that will gradually break down. You will see, I'm sure folks have seen where there are stumps and logs buried in lawns. People wonder, gee, why is all that stuff growing out there? Well, and the mushrooms are growing up out of those old stumps, old logs, old woody debris that's buried. But again, that is breaking down in there. And yes, gradually, as the logs and brush and stuff rot down there, then the tree roots will grow into those too.
So this picture kind of takes a lot into consideration. Firstly, it's the same photo. It's just a bigger picture of what's going on. One of the things that you don't see is the 10-foot high fence. That because the moose will just come in here and cream this whole thing in a blink of an eye, and that's what we have in our neighborhood in abundance here. So you don't see the 10-foot high fence that surrounds this thing, and maybe I should have put that in the graphic. But anyway, the rootstocks that are involved here are there's two different rootstocks. There's semi-dwarfs. One is called an M7 and the other is an M106. And those were Those were discussed in the first workshop because, and the spacing that you see at 10 feet is sort of consistent with those rootstocks. And I mean, it's much more complicated than that. In the case of a slide that Rob Bishop had from our first workshop, he showed bud 9 dwarf rootstock apple trees down in Washington State planted 18 inches apart and in rows that were 11 feet apart. And that's where our apples come from. You know, that's where a huge amount of our commercial apple growing is based, is in these very intensive agricultural programs where the spacing is really different. But anyway, get some space here for this environment. I'm going to put about 1.5 feet of soil down, and then in 4 or 5 years, that will have probably compressed down to maybe about 1 foot. It kind of will compress, and I'm going to get my Ramial chipped wood. I'm going to borrow my buddy's chipper, and we'll block the competitors out with some cardboard that I don't show you there. And then the varieties of apples here: Pristine, Williams Pride, and Anway Crab are all pretty early ripening. They're definitely early ripening varieties. And then the Honeycrisp is sort of my Hail Mary, and hope that it will be able to bear fruit in this location. And if it doesn't, then I could graft on something else. But this is about a seasonal water table issue and clay. If you know, the best scenario would be that the orchard was in a different location, but it's not. That's where it's at.
Okay.
So,
well, just briefly there, these are small ones. You mentioned Pristine apple, and these this year my apples were small. These I just pulled out of my garage refrigerator today. So I've been surprised that they have kept as well as they have. They're good. They're still crisp. Well, not as crisp as I would like, but they're great for applesauce at this point, at any rate. Yeah, they're definitely getting on the mealy side, but that's one most early varieties don't keep very well.
Right.
So that one, I'm pleasantly surprised by it. Some of the others, you have to use very quickly. There's a couple of others I've tried. Red Free will last longer. Discovery will last a little longer than some others too. So worth a try. And just to see, it's a really, when it's fresh off the tree at the right time in late September, early October, they're a terrific eating apple.
So the first workshop delves into, with Blythe Carter and Rob Bishop, really delves into the varieties issue. We are not able to grow the late ripening varieties. Opal, oh my, what an amazing apple. But we can grow a Honeycrisp apple. This one is not grown here. This is a store-bought one. Honeycrisp is one that can grow here. It's perhaps the latest ripening one. And we'll just let you take a look there. That's a little teaser to go back and look at workshop 1. Planting on a hill. You want to talk about this, Ed? We're about to the end of our program.
Right. We could hope, we all would like to have a nice, sunny, gently south-facing hillside. I mean, gently, maybe a low slope of maybe a 10 to 20% grade, so it drains well, and good soil, blah, 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 right? We can dream. So we're going to have to, I guess, you're going to have to think about where again, choose the location. And again, part of it was certainly when we moved to Juneau, we looked for property that had a good aspect and gardening potential. I'm happy we live on the hill, so the water drains off, but it was a lot of muskeg patches. So we had a lot of moisture that we worked around. So if we've got the slope, that's great. We'll dig holes in that slope to plant trees and potentially have a terrace. So maybe we see the one tree here in front of us, and there may be a couple more trees if our slope is wide enough or our lot is wide enough. So maybe we can have 2 or 3 or 4 more trees at about the same level on that slope. When we might need to dig a slight drainage ditch right above it, or swale. Swale being a shallow but wide ditch versus a deep ditch. And it may also depend on how much moisture comes down. That's where digging the holes and, you know, observing how much moisture you have there is important to see. And you might even, where something we've done occasionally is put well-drained soil in a wide, where this tree, you know, maybe the lighter soil there, maybe 4 to 6 feet wide. Maybe you dig a trench that's 40 or 50 feet, we're talking about a lot of soil, 40 or 50 feet long, gently sloping with good drained soil. So that serves as your drainage swale where you plant your tree, and the water goes down to the bottom and the tree roots grow down and the tree roots go out away. You would mention about mulch with orchard compost on the uphill side, partly so that we encourage more rooting on the uphill side for tree stability. And again, the moisture flowing down the slope will also be moving some of those nutrients to the tree roots on the other side. So, you know, we want to take advantage of gravity. Now the tree, what's going to happen if, assuming that to the left, as I'm looking at this tree, to the left is to the south, where the sun is more of the branches are going to grow on that side. So again, the tree is going to be heavier on that side. So you may need to put in an extra 1 or 2 stakes on the uphill side to balance the extra weight of the tree on the sunny side. So again, it's really, I mean, literally we're working with gravity, with and against gravity, I guess. You know, the moisture, water flows downhill, and that's, you know, one of nature's basic rules, which we have to remember. So we don't want our tree to fall over. And we can easily see it if we're planting deciduous trees in front of a big Sitka spruce and hemlock bank. The trees are going to reach toward the sun, away from those dark green trees. So again, it's a balancing act. We may have to do more pruning of the branches on that side, with knowing that that's how the tree is going to grow.
Okay, I'm loath to steal photographs from Michael Phillips. In his book, The Mycorrhizal Planet, which is a book in 2017, it's just an amazing piece of work that kind of unpacks the whole business about the fungal relationships. This was an idea that I just sketched that he showed in his book. And hugelkultur is a German term that relates to mound or hill growing, where decomposing organic material is added, actually not decomposing. Initially, these hugelkultur mounds were using fairly fresh stuff, it looked like to me. I wasn't quite clear on that. But you got to remember that the trees don't want to have their roots upset. They want to have be well rooted and supported. And I guess in the case of a dwarf where you've got it all staked up, that's a little different. But one of the key concepts is that this community of growing doesn't just involve the tree. It could involve deep rooted flowering plants. And one that he likes that I think of as kind of a nasty invasive is comfrey, where it actually throws down a tap root that's quite deep and as a flowering plant. But it's in putting deep roots down, the plant is pulling nutrient up from the deep and helping the aeration of the soil throughout the layer of soil. But top mulching with the same idea of compost, a tree ring, and a biological bank of decomposing woody material, like to make a terrace that will feed the tree's roots for a long, long time, as well as other kinds of things that you can plant along with it. So the idea is that there's going to be other plantings that go along with this idea of a biological terrace. And for a sloped area, this is a real neat idea where a little bit down on the downhill slope, you can make a mound of this decomposing material that those critters, those fungal critters and their friends are feeding from. There you have it.
One more thing that you might plant, that growers might want to plant, not right close to the tree, but out away from the tree in the loosened soil, is a cover crop. So ideally a nitrogen fixing cover crop, which is, you know, a blend of cover crop seeds, varieties, which is then so they can fix some nitrogen from the air, as well as convert some of the nutrients that we might have put into the soil around some of those amendments. And then we cut them down, leave them on the surface to break down, and then which then improves the soil around the trees. And again, is making the nutrients, as opposed to using comfrey, which is a challenge to deal with in the long term.
It won't go away.
To have so using some cover crop plants around those trees, and again, whether we're growing that in raised mounds, raised boxes, long boxes, or long berms, kind of like one of those, that early slide where we saw the fellow with 5 or 6 trees in a long, low mound. He could have had cover crop material in there, or perhaps did in the earlier days.
So what would you suggest for cover cropping typically?
So around here, the stuff I'm using, well, like where I had my garlic bed, and then I follow that with the cover crop, is a mixture. It's a blend of oats and, let's see, vetch and winter peas and small seeded fava beans. So you've got two nitrogen fixers and a couple of more basically organic matter producers. And one of the other reasons I do it particularly in those beds is also to help hold the nutrients so the rains don't wash them out. You know, I've harvested my garlic and there's still nutrients left behind. I want to hold on to those nutrients, if possible, for the next year's crop, unless I'm planting something in the fall, or in this case where I planted the fruit trees. So that material is still breaking down slowly to release the nutrients for the next crop. In this case, it's a fruit tree crop. And we can keep planting a little bit more of that in other years, just kind of move it out away wider out from the trunk.
Well, I thank you, folks. We've got about 19 questions there. I will say that there's an orchard survey that I'd love for people to take. It's on the website. Also, the person that's been kind of a great reference about fruit trees is the Holistic Orchard. It's a backwards image. How about that? The Holistic Orchard with Michael Phillips. We're going to give away a couple copies to folks who sign up and take the orchard survey. And that's your registration for the raffle, is to sign up and take the orchard survey. This program will be on the resources page of the website, as is the other stuff. I'll put Ed's recipe for a raised box planting recipe there as well. On February 13th at 6:30, that's a different time, we're going to have our next workshop, which is growing fruit trees in a greenhouse. And that will feature Rob Bishop of Hoona and Rob Goldberg of Haynes. And they have really different approaches to it. And it's just great what they've been doing, both indoor and outdoors. They're growing fruit trees, both indoors and outdoors. And it's a really interesting topic. Well, we went longer than we were supposed to, but that's just the way it is. And I guess we'll open it to questions. So I suppose Darren will make that magic happen with the Zoom call.
So how do you want to do this, Burl? Do you want to have folks raise their hand or take themselves off of mute and just ask questions? We do have some of them written down here.
Well, do you have any suggestions about that?
I will say that I was watching questions as they came and did answer some of them.
Okay.
So there's a couple more that I can hit, at least that I didn't get a chance to answer right near the end.
So there was one asking about the problems with high nitrogen.
Right.
And then
the issue there is we want to be careful the fertilizers we might use for trees are very, very different requirements than vegetables or a lawn. So high nitrogen fertilizer, we do, well, if you have to have a lawn, you would tend to have a high nitrogen fertilizer to stimulate the grass to grow faster. It's all that green leafy material wants nitrogen to grow, and then you get to mow it and mow it and mow it and fertilize it and mow it and mow it. So, I mean, the only good reason I see for grass is to provide compostables for trees, perhaps. But so what we really want, and the other issue with timing of applying fertilizer, particularly nitrogen, but other stuff too, we don't want to stimulate late woody growth, late sprouting of tree branches. I mean, we actually normally recommend quit fertilizing your trees and shrubs about the 1st of July so that hopefully the tree roots will be able to use the fertilizer which is in the soil, depending on how quickly it is available to the tree roots. We don't want to be, because I have seen it often, late fertilizing, if it stimulates growth, maples are really susceptible to this, but fruit trees very much so also, that you'll have lots of new green leaves. The leaves don't turn color in September, October, although part of that's an issue with how fast our daylight hours change too. But if you've got lots of green leaves on your fruit trees or maple trees or something at the end of September, some of those branches, and they don't want to fall off when they should. Aren't going dormant. The tree is still growing. That is not a good thing. You're likely to get, when the cold weather, frosts and cold weather comes, you're likely to get dieback of those twigs. And, or like we saw this fall, we had an early snow in October. We may get very heavy wet snow on those leaves on the trees held up, and then tree branches break. So low nitrogen fertilizer for fruit trees in general. And that kind of goes to follow up with the, medium phosphorus and potassium, which is more for growing strong stems, strong roots, and for flowering and fruiting, which even kind of applies to things like tomatoes that you would want to stimulate flower and fruit growth.
Let's see. Okay, how do we want to do this? I see some of the chats. It said one is, Ed, would you repeat what you said about a good wood to bury using hugelkultur, as well as what you said about the problems associated with using cottonwood?
Okay. Well, free wood is best. You don't want to have to pay for this stuff. Usually you can give it, and I know folks in Haines, I've had that discussion. I'll burn most anything in my wood stove, but clean wood. And I've hauled cottonwood from Haines to Juneau when I've had an empty truck coming back. And folks, I've had people tell me, why would you bother? But cottonwood is really good to bury if it has isn't green anymore. That's the key. And the deciduous wood, just like with the Ramial wood chips, is going to break down more quickly than conifer wood. But again, if you're making a raft, as it were, on top of your wet soil, you may want something that's going to break down a bit more slowly. But again, you still want that to be breaking down so that the moisture, essentially, you want the trees to rot. You want the wood to rot. If you've got lots of branches of alders, that's fine. Again, you kind of have the similar problem as with cottonwood with willow, that it can easily sprout and wants to grow. So where alder does not. That's the nice thing about alders. It does not. And if you're pulling up little alders, you can see the little nitrogen fixing bacteria nodules on them. So that too is a good thing to use even in composting, because they'll break the small ones, a couple feet tall alders will break down really quickly. So rather than using the deciduous trees are going to break down more quickly than the conifers.
Let's see. Could we unmute Alan? Why don't we take the big mute off there, Darren? Alan Jones.
The way that it works is that they need to unmute themselves.
Okay.
I cannot
see.
Unmute everybody.
I see.
Could I jump in with a question?
Sure, please do.
It's going back to what Ed was just talking about the leaves staying on late. And I mean, we had leaves on our apple trees in November this year. This is Larry and Gustavus. And I don't fertilize after May to avoid that problem, but it's still happened in a big way this year. And I'm wondering, we do use comfrey, and I'm wondering could we've got a lot of it. Could that be adding too much nitrogen when I'm whacking it in like September? I mean, could that be the problem?
That green material, yeah. Well, yes. You'd probably be better off if you're lucky enough to have goats or rabbits or chickens or something to feed it to them. Let them run it through them first, and then save that material for composting. Because certainly that green comfrey would have a lot of more nitrogen in it, and would be fairly quickly available to the trees. So you'd be better off taking that off and composting it first, then putting it back onto and around the tree. But yes, that would be a fairly high nitrogen source in late summer.
Can I add a little something, my experience for this year also? This last winter, I had a huge problem with my trees not going dormant, and I didn't do anything to them. So I think it also may have been just the weird weather we had this year.
We can blame a lot on that.
Yeah. Always blame the weather if all else fails, right?
Alan Jones.
Burl, thank you. This is Alan in Haynes. I've got a list of questions and concerns, but I'll prioritize it to my top two. Just generally speaking, if they could be addressed. First of all, I have been using neem oil for the past several years for the conditionings that it's applicable for. I'm wondering if neem oil itself is prohibitive to that beneficial fungi growth, the mycorrhizal fungal growth that we're talking about.
No.
Second of all, as far as the graft union, when I have gotten bare-rooted trees in the mail, the roots that were growing the graft union was several inches above the roots, and I've made several plantings where I've planted the graft union as much as maybe 8 to 10 inches above the soil level, and I'm wondering if that's an issue as well.
So
go ahead, Ed.
All right. So the main reason for making sure the graft union is above the soil level is that we don't want roots to grow from the scion wood which would then overcome the hopefully probably dwarfing effect of the rootstock. But you can certainly, I know I've got a couple of trees out here. They were relative, the graft union was quite high also above the roots that I saw. But you can gradually, what you would probably want to do in that situation would be just put something like a real sandy soil up against the trunk, and you could add it over a couple of years, an inch of soil to get it up, get the soil level closer to the graft union, and stimulate a bit more rooting from the rootstock below the graft union. But again, it has to be really good draining soil, carefully done. But I mean, because we want more, the more rooting we can get there, the better.
Just, you had asked about neem oil. Okay, neem oil is used as a foliar spray, and a dilute solution of neem oil and some other things can be combined. That's actually going to be one of our workshops later on in the year. And it's part of the basic holistic orchard program. So if you're spraying neem oil in a dilute systematic preparation, like with a backpack sprayer, you wouldn't want to spray that on open blossoms, but the basic preparation is to use it from what's called 1/4 inch green. When you first started to get green growth and before the buds open, there's about 4 applications that are involved throughout the cycle. As we, in the first few months of the summer season, but that neem oil is really not something that would be detrimental to the beneficial microorganisms. That's actually the exact opposite. The neem oil is very much a beneficial spray. It's a natural, organic, beneficial spray that's going to help the right balanced mycorrhizal or fungal or bacterial growth thrive.
I have a question about orienting the graft when you're planting. I've often wondered if it's better to point the graft away from the sun, or if it matters at all, or if it needs the best airflow. Say there's any pits in there or places where, say, moss or lichens or bad funguses could build up. Do you have any thoughts on that?
We had a former extension agent, some of the more mature folks might remember Jim Douglas, and he would often recommend, at least when transplanting trees, problem is they don't tell us how they were grown in the orchard or what the orientation to the south side is. And I don't know that there is a convention in the orchards that the graft union is on the side, one side or the other, down the row or to the side of the row or not. His recommendation, if you're transplanting a tree, was to transplant the tree, keep track of the orientation and keep it the same. And I'm not sure how serious that is or not, but having transplanted trees, and sometimes very often we'll notice that the tree is growing unevenly, has more branches on one side than the other. And I mean, my personal opinion is sometimes I'll turn it 90 to 180 degrees to orient it, maybe to grow more branches on the thinner side. On that picture we showed where you could see the cut off top of the rootstock on the graft union, I don't think it's much of an issue, but if you had that pointing south, again, that side of the tree should dry out more quickly. And that would mean that you're maybe less likely to get fungus to grow down into that cut off surface where the rootstock was cut. Because we don't normally paint any paint or tar or put anything over our cut pruning wounds anymore, unlike the good old days. So just that's might be a reason to face that part south. Otherwise, it shouldn't matter too much.
Could Rob Bishop join in? And he has a comment about neem oil. I thought was maybe good. Maybe we could unmute there, Rob and Blythe, if you want to just chime in.
Yeah, I was just saying that I've used a lot of neem oil, and my observation with neem on cherries has been it can burn it. So just use it very sparingly on that. Apples seem to be a little more tolerant, and especially if you put too much on the apples, and we're going to be talking about greenhouse trees, but stuff outside breaks down a lot further, faster, especially in the light. So, but for cherries, I've had a few spotting issues with that. So that was the only notation I had. Comment on the neem. I would say, Burl, that my observation when we plant trees too, anything on the southern exposure over time, the tendency with the tree, we got noise, background noise, is to, we got wonderful children. The tendency is that the tree will eventually lean into the sun. And if with your own experience over time, sometimes I tend to plant the trees, lean them back just a hair away from the sun, knowing, especially if you got an area that's very shaded on one side. So it's just something to consider, and some of that goes with experience, and or just really stake it well. That's it.
So you prop them back a ways, kind of tilt them back just a little away from the sun.
Yeah, and I can't define exactly what your situation would be, but my own experience is I'll pull them back like an inch a little bit, and they'll just kind of slowly correct themselves, or try to keep, sometimes there'll be one branch when you prune it that wants to just lean way out on the south side, and I'll try to prune it so that there's a branch on the left, right, and the west or east side more, so the light can get through it instead of having it all on the south side. So it's just something that we use over time in our own experience.
I would agree with that. And also where we had the picture of the trees planted on the slope, again, have them lean back into the slope, assuming the slope side is to the north. And again, knowing the tree is going to grow to the south.
Yeah, I haven't used neem oil myself, but I did read definitely don't spray neem oil when your pollinators are flying around, because neem oil can actually hurt them if you accidentally spray them, or they land on the thing that has just been freshly sprayed. So be careful with that. As far as when I plant a tree, I just basically go mostly for orientating it how the branches look best when I plant it, which way and then I do, if it's on a slope, I will lean it slightly back.
Blythe, when you mention which you plant, so which way the branches look best, are the best branches on the south side or on the north side?
Actually, I try to make it so that they're not favoring the either side too much. I try and make it, my idea is to have a vase shape when I plant mine, because I hate ladders. So I'm trying to keep my trees fairly small, and so I try and plant them so that they're sort of evenly spaced. So I'm not going to have a whole bunch leaning forward or backwards, but more to the side is really what I do. And they automatically, to either side, they automatically kind of work themselves out.
I'm going to talk about a quote, or rather a comment or a question from Susan Cox. She has any advice about amending soil around an old apple tree that doesn't produce much fruit? A 4-H bare root purchase years ago. The trunk is surrounded by weedy grass. And I imagine you might have some apple scab too. Do you have any apple scab, Susan Cox? And could you unmute yourself and we'll talk about that?
Hi, yes, I think I do.
Well, what about that, Ed?
Okay. Well, certainly if you can keep, about how big is the tree, Susan?
It's, oh gosh, probably, well, 20 feet tall or more. It's had apples periodically. I mean, I really bought it years ago and I didn't have a clue what I was doing.
Okay. So for potentially doing a bit of pruning, which that's coming in a later presentation, but the fertilizing a little early yet. But if the ground is thawed out by early April, would be a time for fertilizing, and that could use whether you use the tree spikes or the fertilizer pellets like I showed there earlier, or you can use a granular fertilizer. We'll just those three at least. The location to put any of those is out near the drip line, the outer tips of the branches, which is where the most active roots are growing and taking in nutrients. You can poke a hole into the soil. You can even with a crowbar or a piece of rebar, or even if you have one of these single bulb planters, it's got basically a tube with a handle. You punch a hole down 6-8 inches deep, pull out the plug, put in the fertilizer, and whether it's a granular, organic, or chemical fertilizers. And we can come up with a recommendation. The whole tree, if it's that big, might need 2 pounds of 832-16. Again, our old extension agents preferred fertilizer, or a balanced organic fertilizer. And you put some of that, you would punch holes in every, say, 2 feet out around the drip line. And put in, might be a couple tablespoons or half a cup, usually more of the organics as an alternative, or so many tree spikes, it says, for a certain diameter of trunk. Or if you're ambitious and want to go out and harvest seaweed around that drip line, you could put a 2-foot wide strip. You could put 10 to 20 buckets of seaweed out there. That's a lot of seaweed, but it's a sizable tree at this point.
Yeah.
Or you might use a couple bags of compost, composted steer manure, chicken manure, some of that kind of material on there. It may be a little messy if it's on your lawn, but again, that's the location where the fertilizer or compost should be applied for the tree. And again, some kind of careful pruning, and maybe pruning the center out a bit to open it up. So rather than getting lots and lots of little apples, you'll get fewer but larger apples. So it's a combined effort of fertilizing and pruning and timing to improve your fruit crop.
Thank you. One other question then. Would you do anything with the grass? It's not lawn per se. It's nothing we really care about. But if I try to pull it up, or I don't want to hurt the roots, so should I do anything to the grass?
Well, probably not fertilize the grass or the stuff, whatever is growing underneath there, particularly not, again, I mentioned earlier about the nitrogen fertilizer. Usually it's high nitrogen fertilizer for lawns. If you spread it on your lawn, well, that stuff leaches down into the roots of the trees.
Yeah,
so
we know
you don't, and you would not want to definitely not use weed and feed in that area. So again, you'd be better off using a garden fertilizer, a low nitrogen garden fertilizer, rather than lawn fertilizer around it.
Thank you.
Don't encourage the grass. What can I say?
Right. Well, I just didn't know if I should be trying to actively kill it.
Yeah. Well, that's again where punching the holes in gets you kind of down below the grass, some of the grassroots levels. So it gets more to the tree root level.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to add a little something. Find out if they have been fertilizing that grass with a high nitrogen fertilizer, because if they have been, it might actually be encouraging the tree to produce lots of greenery, but not fruit very much. And that might be part of your problem.
Right.
Right, we're not fertilizing the grass. It's just grown on its own.
Yeah, I would also suggest with what Ed said, and also prune. I would really prune that thing. Sometimes giving it a good prune will really inspire it to fruit. It might be too happy. You want to traumatize it a little bit.
Maybe a pruning workshop at your house, Susan.
Great, I'm all for it.
Let's answer. Julia Billings has a question that basically it says, can you plant trees on bedrock with a raised bed, or is that a lost cause?
I would say yes, as far as using the raised bed. I mean, that would be the way to go. Again, the challenge there is getting a large enough, wide enough box, I guess, raised bed on top of the bedrock so that the tree can spread its roots out for support. And maybe I'm not going to recommend dynamite in this case, but I have seen that done also. That's a little extreme, however, but if much bedrock does have cracks in it, and tree roots will certainly grow down into the cracks and crevices too. And that tends to be one of the areas where if there's cracks in the rock, that some of the nutrients, the organic matter gets down into those cracks, can stimulate the roots to grow down into them too. I mean, certainly we've seen the trees growing on rocks, pretty amazing locations sometimes, growing into the cracks. And then of course, along times comes the wind. If they're not well anchored enough, over they go. So might need some other anchors around the sides to help support the tree.
Another question is from Pauline Strong. She's asking, what is the purpose of neem oil? And want to just kind of outline.
Take that one because I haven't used it yet.
Okay. So, and Rob Bishop has used it. Generally, if it a spray for neem oil is about a 1% solution, so it's very dilute. And because it's it gets to be like thick, like too thick to spray, you have to add a little dish detergent, organic dish detergent to it. And I generally want to direct Pauline or anybody with this question, which is really fascinating. I'm buying a backpack sprayer. By God, I'm going to be spraying this year. And because it's really the right thing, and it does adjust. And basically the idea is that you're nudging the epidermis of the entire tree, the entire ground area around the tree, and the beginning foliage prior to full bloom. You're nudging it so that the beneficial microbes are prevailing. And the composition that Michael Phillips uses involves neem oil. It also involves a liquid fish, which is a pure fish emulsion. Those are the two items. He also puts a little bit of molasses in it, but it's a fairly dilute solution. It's not thick, but it is a natural holistic spray that nudges the pathogenic microorganisms, basically, and also nudges the success of pests, such as flies or moths that can be a problem, caterpillars, so that it reduces it improves the quality of the fruit. That's the basic idea.
I had one question from Maria about, after my comments about timing for adding fertilizer. She was asking about, well, what about adding seaweed in the fall? And I told her privately and will publicly that seaweed is great stuff. It has slow release nutrients generally in it, unless you, for those folks in Sitka particularly, I guess, who might get seaweed with kelp or with herring eggs on it. That's hot stuff. But normally the seaweed that's breaking up the fucus and other stuff coming in this time of year, from September and later, has the micronutrients and tends to be higher in potassium. That's the major nutrient it has. Great stuff generally whenever you can get it. And I hauled it last week, hauled seaweed and put stuff around some trees and on garden beds whenever I can, pretty much. And even to compost, again, compost tends to be slow release material. And so again, that if you don't have, I actually threw the seaweed on top of some snow a few weeks back when we briefly had snow. It's coming again. So, but compost would be another one that could be added even now, or if you can add it to bare soil, would also be okay. And then that nutrients will leach down into the soil. Tree roots, as long as the soil's not frozen, there's some growth happening. Although warmer soil will stimulate tree root growth and nutrient uptake.
I hope that Mark Browning, if you haven't left the meeting, I want to Mark Browning's question is: lateral roots promote outward growth. Lateral roots promote outward growth of roots as opposed to vertical root growth for all fruit trees. So the fruit tree, if it had the soil, if it had the deep, perfect soil, which is not what I have, would produce a huge root system that might be 2 to 3 times the size of the canopy over the course of a long-lived 100-year-old fruit tree. It's just an enormous amount of woody material that's under the ground. But the fruit trees are feeding their nutrient capture and the feeding process that is tied in with this fungal community and this mutualistic multi-species thing is happening at the surface, close to the surface. So you're asking about vertical root growth. There's definitely roots searching and digging and diving and going down for water. But if they hit a water table, they're not going to go deeper than that. They're not going to dig down and bury themselves in the aquifer, so to speak.
And also they're going to be limited by cold soil. So again, the warmer soil is closer to the surface. That's where the most active root growth is going to be.
If this is the time, could I jump in with a couple of fertilizer questions?
By all means.
This is Larry from Gustavus again. I missed the first couple minutes, so you may have said this, but I didn't get an indication in listening. I thought I'd read that when you're planting trees, you want to go very light on the amendments that you put in there to force the roots to grow out further. But you all seem to be suggesting put gallons of compost in there.
Not unless you can do that in a large area, Larry. So that to encourage that, like again, in that raised box that I was planting, it was all rich soil. So, but yeah, if you're going to be doing much soil amendment, the wider the better, and out away from, getting out away from the trunk, away from the tree to stimulate those feeder roots to go out. I mean, I joke, my joke is about, you don't want to make this wonderful, it's like a pot of soil that's been improved really great. It's, it's only 3 feet across. And then the tree roots don't want to leave to go out into that inhospitable outer soil, kind of like a teenager doesn't want to leave home because he's had it too good being fed, watered, and diapered for too many years. So you want to, that's why you're spreading out those nutrients out gradually out and away from the tree trunk, adding compost, seaweed, other amendments out away from the trunk, not improve the soil a whole bunch in the hole that you plant.
Okay. And the second question is, this year I got a bunch of rotten fish in a barrel that I stirred and let mature, shall I say, for a few months, and
wow,
some of that in limited quantities around the drip line of trees, like in April or May. Is that too much nitrogen, do you think, or is it worth a shot?
early, that time of year, April, May, that's the time to apply that stuff. Dilute it. Be careful with that stuff. Yeah, definitely dilute it, so it's not too powerful. And hopefully that doesn't attract the bears and other critters to your neighborhood if it's rather fragrant, as I suspect it would be. But no, if you can dig some holes, dig some shallow holes, pour some in and cover them up and work your way around your trees, that would be a good choice, a good stuff to use.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Well, we're at about, I'm answering Emily's question. Emily, about the dilute neem molasses, etc. I really think that you need to buy a copy of Michael Phillips' book, The Holistic Orchard. It's a really good book. It'll cost you about $40, and or you could probably find it online. Michael's information is capsulated in little YouTube clips. There's a lot of YouTube clips, and what you're looking for is a reference to natural foliar spray. And the program that he recommends, there's a cycle of 4 sprays that he uses the same spray, but he applies it 4 times between the point at which the green buds are about 1/4 to 1/2 an inch long, before there's any kind of a real show of a floral show, or it calls it early pink, where the first pink show of the bud is there, but you're not opening the spray to any kind of real floral show. You wouldn't want to do that. But I would recommend that you look at that in his reference material, of either online or in one of his books. It's a little more complex, and I don't feel well enough versed to give that as information.
Burl, I would just point out too that the Haynes Library has all of Michael's books and his video.
Great, thank you. The video is just super. It's a 5-hour video that is just outstanding, and so you just got the mycorrhizal planet then.
Yeah,
Hey,
we
Burl?
just got those in the video and the mycorrhizal book in this week, so they're on the shelf. They're ready to go.
Cool. Thank you, Carolyn.
Hey, Burl.
Yeah, Darren.
Is there? Yeah, I just had a couple odds and ends. I thought I'd maybe just throw it in here, just right at the end here. For folks who are interested, I think that's probably all of us, in the mycorrhizal fungal relationship. One thing to keep into consideration is our nutrient sources, especially the phosphorus. One thing that I'm aware of is that if we keep to the organic forms, the rock phosphate, the shells and such, then that keeps the trees to continue in providing their side of the relationship, which is an exudate of sugars they're pumping out into the soil, which then attracts the fungus to the roots. And that triggers, if there is a readily available phosphorus in forms that are available in commercial fertilizers, then they won't put out as much of that, and therefore they won't be attracting as much of a relationship with those arbuscular mycorrhiza. So you do want to try and avoid those commercial phosphate sources. Another thing, one of my colleagues up at UAF, a soils researcher, and I were chatting about some of the strategies of using the mulch on the surface in whatever type of growing environment. And as Ed was saying, the temperatures are really affecting where these roots, where the feeder roots are going to go on, and where the biological activity is. It's, as we know, it's right there at the surface. And so when we do add that a layer of mulch, we're preventing the sun from being able to do that heating of the soil. Mm-hmm. And so how much of an effect that has, unless there's actual hard research done, we don't really know. And so I'm wanting to bring that to this project, and he has some hobo devices that's the that we can sample the temperatures at different depths, and if we couple that with some tests of biological activity, actually identifying the different arbuscular mycorrhiza, I think is pretty advanced. But at least looking at some of those different temperature regimes, depending on like how thick we put the mulch, those are some things that we can find out about. And then one last thing on the idea of cover crops and such. I'm excited, and I haven't really seen it, I don't think, around, but the idea of using alder specifically as like a hedge type of crop, where we coppice it, where you're cutting it down low, you're laying it down like Ed was talking about with some of the other type of nitrogen fixers, but alder specifically is a nice nitrogen fixer. It's so vigorous around here. It seems like the perfect thing to really do a nice little hedge where it's, that's real like a permaculture type of thing. But I haven't seen it, but I think that's really opportune, because every time we cut it, not only do we get those leaves and the sticks and everything, but a commensurate amount of roots will also die off, releasing the nitrogen and other nutrients into the soil.
So would we whack it down like weed whack it in the fall?
I think that that would probably be more of a spring thing, because we want that nutrient flush to come out in the during the growing season.
Oh, right, before. So otherwise, you'd end up with a nitrogen hit when you don't want it if you did that in the fall.
I'll comment on that one. The challenge is with any other trees, let's say our native trees, doesn't matter, alders, willows, cottonwoods, spruces, hemlocks, any of those. We need to have our non-native plantings, which is probably most of the fruit trees we're talking about. Yeah, definitely, other than the Oregon crab. The competition, the root competition, it can be severe. So the spacing of having those native trees, you can't have them too close to the nice trees, the fruiting trees that you're planting, because they just like roots can sense nutrient availability, and those big trees, those big native trees will send their roots into those new garden beds and steal nutrients. So which means we have to keep adding more. So that's a challenging one, if so Darren, you mentioned about having a coppiced hedge or something like that. I don't know unless I could be cutting the roots between the hedge and the planting beds. Maybe that would be good, so that the roots aren't just, otherwise I suppose it is a circle, from the planting beds, roots of alders, up in the alders, chop them off, throw them onto the planting beds. But it's a challenge there.
Darren, you're suggesting that the alder would be more like a lawn? Is that what you're saying?
I was envisioning something along the lines of chopping it down from somewhere to 6 to 12, or who knows what it would turn out to be. But when you're doing that, there's no, and using the Sitka alder, of course, not like giant red alder or anything, but hedging them where, because the nutrients that are going into it, it's not going to suck up any more nutrients than it's going to use, and then it turns it into its own plant. So it's not like it's going to be like, stealing too much, I think. And that's, the more it grows, the more you can cut it, the more you can feed the soil. So yeah, again, that cycle.
Well, sounds way too much like a lawn, Darren.
Yeah, but a good lawn. Yeah, nitrogen fixing, feeding the soil.
Really something that we've not talked about yet, but it's certainly part of Michael Phillips's whole program is the and the example was comfrey that gets people's, I get it. It's like this really, really terrible spreading thing. But that's his kind of go-to planting in New Hampshire, where he's using this deep-rooted critter that is breaking the soil and pulling up material, nutrient, whatever, and allowing aeration into the soil matrix around the tree. So he has various things that he plants that are compatible, and they certainly suck up nutrient. There's no question about it. But they're also contributing to the complex root environment that is a benefit to the fungal and the tree productivity.
It might be interesting to see, I haven't seen his books or seen his discussion of the comfrey and in his orchard, but also whether that the areas where he's using that is rocky, gravelly, glacial dropping, the stuff that the glaciers left behind, kind of like in the upper end of the Mendenhall Valley, where it's rocky, gravelly, bouldery, sandy, there's a lot of sand there too. But again, with the high water table. So if Michael's area where he's recommending it doesn't have a high water table, I could see where those roots could grow deep, where here, not so much. And then the comfrey roots would probably spread out widely across into those same areas. Again, I'm still thinking about competition, for nutrients. Mm-hmm. Comfrey, I've seen comfrey roots the size of rhubarb roots, which is 2 to 3 inches diameter, which is kind of like the size of the alder roots and the cottonwood roots. Definitely competitive.
Yeah,
well,
when we kill something.
Go ahead, Darren.
Yeah, when we kill something on top, then it also dies down below too, and we can keep cutting it and keep using it. I mean, if it's a benefit, the leaves are a benefit. And then
Yeah.
I don't know if it was Larry, but who was experiencing what seemed like a late leaves, and I think that might have been if he's pruning his comfrey near the trees, then there could be a die-off going on in the roots.
Yep.
And be releasing nutrients which
Yep.
are feeding the tree and causing those leaves to stay on. That kind of thing can be going.
Although this is Larry, I would add, I don't think those roots ever die. I mean, I'm trimming it 3 times a year, and it just keeps coming back. And the problem I've got, it's fairly close to the tree, but it's very dense now. And my own hope is that the comfrey is inside where the feeder roots are. But it's aggressive stuff, but it doesn't, you were talking about the roots going laterally. It moves very little. We've been surprised how slowly it migrates.
As long as you don't rototill or dig nearby.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, comfrey is the kudzu of Alaska.
We had some comfrey stalks that we cut actually produce roots once, and I was kind of astounded at that, but just a heads up.
Well, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned it. Let's see. Ed, did you want to say something about the master gardening workshop or something? Did I miss something there?
Well, there will be coming up. We're working on scheduling for March 19th, 20th, a mini garden conference. So, it's a Friday night and Saturday, a total of 8 programs, presentations, and they'll be on Zoom also. So that's something I know Darren will be able to send out to notify folks, as well as the master gardeners can let folks know. And again, I can make sure you get a link to that. So maybe you can share it through your mailing lists.
Well. Okay, I guess let's wrap it up and go home. And thank you, everybody. We have 32 people still on the horn here. Oh, there's a couple more questions here. They're just people saying thanks. Yeah, I appreciate everybody being involved. We're going to have another workshop on February 13th at 6:30, and that is Rob Bishop of Huna, who has a very different approach than Rob Goldberg of Haynes, but they are growing fruit trees in a greenhouse, and it's pretty cool.
Oh, I know what I was going to ask. Well, to Rob Bishop particularly, are you going to be talking about the kind of planting mix, soil mix you might use in the containers in the greenhouse?
I'll make a note of it, Ed.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, we'll see y'all.